Stop everything you're doing right now. Because what I'm about to tell you could mark the beginning of the end for women's professional basketball in America. I'm not being dramatic. I'm not exaggerating for clicks. And I genuinely wish I was wrong about this. But the evidence is stacking up. The cracks are spreading. And the collapse has officially begun. Just hours ago, a deal was struck between the WNBA and the Players Union that sent shockwaves through the sports world. On the surface, it sounds like progress. It sounds like cooperation. But when you dig beneath the headlines, it's a freeze, a moratorium, a complete shutdown of league activity. And what does that mean for the fans? The ones who've supported this league through thick and thin? The ones who bought tickets, jerseys, and stayed up late watching games nobody else cared about? They're now locked out of the process entirely. No free agency frenzy. No expansion draft excitement. No watching their favorite team build a championship roster. Nothing. The machinery of the WNBA has ground to a halt, and the people running the show seem to be sleepwalking toward a cliff. Here's what makes this so maddening. We were this close to a golden age. Think about where women's basketball was just 12 months ago. Caitlin Clark had ignited a firestorm of interest. Viewership numbers were shattering records. Corporate sponsors were lining up with checkbooks open. A new media rights deal was on the horizon, one that promised to inject hundreds of millions of dollars into the league. The momentum was unstoppable, or so we thought, because behind closed doors something was rotting. The relationship between the league and the Players Union wasn't just strained, it was toxic. And the January 9th deadline? The one that was supposed to produce a new collective bargaining agreement? It came and went. No deal. No extension. No progress. Just silence, followed by this moratorium announcement. Now, I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I love women's basketball. I've covered this league for years. I've celebrated its victories and mourned its setbacks. The athletes in the WNBA are some of the most talented, hardworking, and dedicated professionals in all of sports. This isn't about taking sides. This is about telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And the truth is, the fans are exhausted. They're not just tired of the uncertainty. They're tired of the rhetoric. They're tired of watching negotiations devolve into personal attacks and public posturing. They're tired of feeling like the people in charge care more about winning arguments than saving the league. But here's where things get really interesting. Because just before this moratorium was announced, just hours before the freeze went into effect, several WNBA teams made a move that nobody saw coming. A move that was either a stroke of genius or a desperate gamble that could backfire spectacularly. They sent out qualifying offers to their players. In the middle of all this chaos, with no CBA in place, with the future of the league hanging by a thread. What did they know that we didn't? And more importantly, what happens now that the moratorium has trapped those offers in limbo? The answer to that question might determine whether the WNBA survives the next 12 months. You see, there's a strategy at play here that most people are completely missing. The mainstream sports media isn't talking about it. The casual fans have no idea. Even some insiders are scratching their heads. But when you understand the psychology behind this move, when you see the chess pieces being positioned on the board, everything starts to make sense. And it reveals something deeply troubling about where this negotiation has gone wrong. The Players Union is fighting for something. Fighting hard for it, actually. And on the surface, their demand sounds completely reasonable. Revenue sharing. A bigger slice of the pie. The same thing players in the NBA, NFL, and MLB have fought for, and won. So why is this different? Why is this demand in this league at this moment in time potentially suicidal? The answer involves math, economics, and a harsh dose of reality that nobody in the union seems willing to accept. But before I break down the numbers, before I show you exactly why this revenue-sharing fight could kill the WNBA, I need to tell you about the person at the center of this entire mess. A figure who's been advising the players, shaping their strategy, guiding their decisions, and whose counsel, according to multiple sources close to the negotiation, has been nothing short of catastrophic. Who is this person? What do they actually want? And is it possible that destroying the WNBA might actually serve their interests? That's where things get dark. That's where the Real story begins. There's a name being whispered in the halls of WNBA headquarters. A name that makes league executives clench their jaws. A name that ownership groups discuss in hushed, frustrated tones behind closed doors. And it's a name that, if my sources are correct, could be responsible for driving this entire negotiation off a cliff. I'm not going to reveal that name yet. Not because I'm protecting anyone, but because understanding who this person is requires understanding what they've done, the strategy they've employed, the ideology they've pushed, and why it's so fundamentally disconnected from reality. Let's rewind for a moment. When collective bargaining negotiations began, there was genuine optimism on both sides. The league had momentum. The players had leverage. Everyone acknowledged that the old CBA was outdated, that it was time for the athletes to receive compensation more reflective of the league's growing value. That part wasn't controversial. What became controversial was the method. See, there are two ways to approach a negotiation like this. The first way is collaborative. You acknowledge shared interests. You recognize that the league's success and the players' success are intertwined. You fight hard for your priorities, but you keep the relationship intact. The second way is adversarial. You treat the other side as an enemy. You make demands that sound good in press releases but collapse under financial scrutiny. You prioritize ideology over outcomes. Guess which approach the players' union chose? Now, I want to be fair here. The players have legitimate grievances. The pay disparity between the WNBA and NBA is staggering. The working conditions, the travel schedules, the lack of charter flights. These are real issues that deserve real solutions. Nobody disputes that. But here's where things went sideways. Instead of focusing on achievable wins, higher base salaries, better benefits, improved working conditions, the union became fixated on one demand above all others: revenue sharing. Specifically, they wanted a 50-50 split of league revenues. The same model used in the NBA. On paper, this sounds perfectly reasonable. Why shouldn't the players receive half of what the league generates? But here's the problem. The WNBA doesn't generate what the NBA generates. Not even close. Let me give you some numbers that will put this in perspective. The NBA generates approximately $10 billion in annual revenue. Under their collective bargaining agreement, players receive roughly 50% of that, about $5 billion split among roughly 450 players. The WNBA? The league's total revenue is estimated at somewhere between $200 million and $250 million annually. And that's being generous. Some analysts put the figure even lower. Now, if you apply that same 50% revenue sharing model to the WNBA, what do you get? Roughly $100 to $125 million to be split among approximately 144 players. Sounds okay, right? Except, the league is already paying players close to that amount when you factor in salaries, benefits, and other compensation. In some estimates, the WNBA is actually paying players more than 50% of revenue. So what exactly is the union fighting for? This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Because the truth is, revenue sharing only works when there's significant revenue to share. In the NBA, that 50% split means players are dividing billions. The pie is enormous. Everyone gets a massive slice. In the WNBA, that same percentage means dividing hundreds of millions, while the league simultaneously tries to fund expansion, marketing, facilities, and operations. It's like demanding half of a small pizza while complaining that your slice isn't as big as someone else's half of a large pizza. The math doesn't work. It can't work. Not yet. So why is the union so committed to this demand? This is where that unnamed figure becomes relevant. Because someone convinced the players that revenue sharing wasn't just a negotiating position. It was a moral imperative, a symbol of respect, a referendum on how society values women's athletics. And once it became symbolic, compromise became impossible. Backing down meant betraying the cause. Accepting less than 50% meant accepting disrespect. The negotiation stopped being about dollars and started being about dignity. Which sounds inspiring until you realize, you can't pay rent with dignity. You can't fund a league with symbolism. And you can't grow a business by demanding money that doesn't exist. Now, remember those qualifying offers I mentioned? The ones that teams rushed to send out right before the moratorium? Here's why that move was brilliant. For weeks, maybe months, the players had been thinking in abstractions. Revenue percentages, ideological victories, collective power. But when a qualifying offer lands in your inbox, suddenly you're thinking about your money, your contract, your future. That one-year qualifying offer might not be everything you wanted, but it's tangible. It's real. It's a number you can actually spend. The league was trying to break the spell, trying to remind individual players that while the union fights for principles, they're the ones who pay the price if those principles destroy the league. And let me tell you something about those players. These aren't millionaires sitting on piles of cash. Most WNBA athletes earn modest salaries by professional sports standards. Many work overseas during the off-season just to make ends meet. They don't have years of savings to fall back on if the league collapses. They don't have guaranteed contracts worth tens of millions. If the WNBA fails, they lose everything. Their careers, their platform, their life's work, and the people advising them, the union leadership pushing these demands, they'll move on to other jobs, other causes, other fights. But the players? They'll be left with nothing but memories of what could have been. This brings us back to the moratorium, the freeze that just went into effect. On the surface, it looks like a mutual agreement, a pause button that both sides press together. But when you examine the timing, when you look at what happened in the 48 hours before this announcement, you start to see something else entirely. You start to see desperation. You start to see a last-ditch effort by one side to prevent something catastrophic from happening. And you start to see why the fans, the people who actually love this league, are being shut out of the conversation entirely. What happened in those final hours before the moratorium? What was said behind closed doors? And why did one WNBA team owner allegedly call this situation the biggest crisis in league history? The answers will shock you. 48 hours. That's all it took for everything to unravel. 48 hours of frantic phone calls, emergency meetings, desperate last-minute negotiations that went absolutely nowhere. And when the dust settled, the WNBA was frozen solid. But what the public saw, the carefully worded press releases, the diplomatic statements about mutual agreements, that was just the surface. Underneath, pure chaos. Let me paint you a picture of what actually happened in those final hours before the January 9th deadline. League officials were working around the clock. Conference calls at midnight. Lawyers drafting proposals at 3 a.m. Team owners flying into New York on private jets for emergency face-to-face meetings. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about a contract. This was about survival. The expansion teams were waiting. Portland and Toronto had written massive checks to join the league. They'd hired staff, secured arenas, built marketing campaigns. And now, they were in limbo. Free agents were panicking. Players who should have been fielding offers, negotiating deals, planning their futures, they were stuck, frozen, unable to move forward with their careers. The entire ecosystem of women's professional basketball had ground to a halt. So what went wrong? According to sources close to the negotiation, the final breakdown happened over a single issue. Not salary caps, not benefits, not working conditions, revenue sharing. Again, the league came to the table with what they believed was a generous offer. Significant salary increases, improved benefits, better travel accommodations, a pathway to revenue sharing that would phase in over time as the league grew. It wasn't everything the players wanted, but it was substantial progress. The union's response? Not good enough. They wanted 50% revenue sharing. Immediately. Non-negotiable. League officials tried to explain, again, why this wasn't financially feasible. They showed projections. They presented data. They outlined exactly why the current revenue couldn't support that model. The union wasn't interested in data. They wanted symbolic victory. Here's what happened next. As the deadline approached, the tone of negotiations shifted dramatically. What had been tense but professional became openly hostile. Accusations flew. Trust evaporated. Both sides started viewing each other not as partners in a shared enterprise, but as enemies in a zero-sum war. One league source described it as watching two people argue about how to steer the ship while it's actively sinking. Another source, this one close to the union, had a different perspective. The players are tired of crumbs, they said. They built this league. They deserve their fair share. Fair share. Those two words kept coming up again and again. But here's the question nobody seemed willing to ask. What happens when the fair share of a failing business is nothing? Now let's talk about the people being hurt most by this stalemate. Not the owners. They have other investments, other businesses, other sources of wealth. Not the union leadership. They'll find other causes, other fights, other platforms. The fans. The people who actually love women's basketball. Think about what they've been through. Years of defending the league against critics. Years of showing up to games in half-empty arenas. Years of arguing with skeptics who said women's sports would never matter. And then, finally, the breakthrough came. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, the Iowa LSU rivalry that captivated the nation, the championship games that drew millions of viewers, the sense that women's basketball had finally arrived. These fans were ready to celebrate. They were ready for free agency drama, expansion draft excitement, roster moves and trades and all the content that makes sports fandom fun. Instead, they got locked out. And it's not just the lockout that's frustrating them. It's the rhetoric. It's the social media posts from union representatives that seem more focused on scoring political points than reaching agreements. It's the feeling that the players they love and support might be sabotaging their own league. I've been reading comments from WNBA fans over the past few weeks. Longtime supporters, season ticket holders, people who've been ride or die for women's basketball since the league's founding in 1996. You know what they're saying? I'm exhausted. I don't know who to root for anymore. Maybe the critics were right. Maybe this league can't survive. When your most loyal fans start talking like that, you have a crisis on your hands. So what exactly does this moratorium mean in practical terms? Let me break it down. During a moratorium, the normal machinery of league business stops. Teams cannot sign free agents. Players cannot negotiate new contracts. Trades cannot be completed. Expansion drafts cannot happen. Everything freezes. Now, the stated purpose of this freeze is to create space for negotiation. Both sides theoretically use this time to hammer out a new CBA without the distraction of roster moves happening simultaneously. But here's the catch. Negotiations have been happening for months, years even, and they've gone nowhere. What makes anyone think a moratorium will suddenly unlock progress? The optimistic view, removing the deadline pressure will allow for more thoughtful, productive conversations. The pessimistic view, this is just prolonging the inevitable, delaying the collapse rather than preventing it. I wish I could tell you I'm optimistic. Not every player is on board with the union's strategy. I want to be careful here. Players who speak out against union leadership face real consequences. Social pressure, professional backlash, being labeled as traitors or sellouts. So most stay quiet. But privately? Behind closed doors? In conversations that never make it to social media? There's dissent. Some players think the revenue-sharing demand is unrealistic. They'd rather take the guaranteed salary increases and improved benefits than gamble everything on an ideological victory. Some players are worried about their careers. They're in their prime. They have limited windows to earn money in professional basketball. And every month the league stays frozen is a month of their career wasted. Some players are watching the fan reaction, the exhaustion, the frustration, the growing apathy, and wondering if the union's aggressive tactics are doing more harm than good. But speaking up? Going public with these concerns? Too risky. The pressure to present a unified front is immense. On the other side of the table, team owners are reaching their breaking point. These aren't cartoon villains counting gold coins in dark rooms. Many WNBA owners are genuine believers in women's sports. They invested money knowing the league wasn't profitable. They accepted losses because they believed in the mission. But patience has limits. One ownership source described the current situation as watching your house burn down while the people you're trying to help argue about paint colors. Another was more blunt. At some point, you have to ask yourself whether saving this league is even possible, and whether the players actually want to be saved. Strong words, perhaps too strong, but they reflect a real sentiment spreading through ownership circles. Here's what keeps me up at night about this whole situation. Women's basketball was having a moment. A genuine, once-in-a-generation cultural moment. The stars were aligned. The audience was growing. The money was finally starting to flow. And instead of capitalizing on that momentum, instead of signing a deal, even an imperfect one, and riding the wave, both sides chose to fight. Now the wave is crashing. The momentum is stalling. And the window of opportunity is closing. Will there be another Caitlin Clark? Another rivalry that captures national attention? Another surge of interest that makes the league impossible to ignore? Maybe. But maybe not. And if the WNBA squanders this moment, if they let internal conflict destroy everything they've built, there might not be a second chance. This brings us to the expansion situation. Portland, Toronto. Two cities that were supposed to welcome WNBA franchises. Two cities that paid enormous expansion fees for the privilege. They're currently in limbo, frozen alongside everyone else. But what's happening behind the scenes with these expansion teams is even more alarming. There are whispers that one ownership group is reconsidering their investment entirely. There are rumors of legal consultations about whether expansion fees could be recovered if the league fails. And there's one particularly disturbing report that emerged just yesterday. A report suggesting that a major expansion investor is already exploring exit strategies. If even one expansion team pulls out before launching, the consequences would be catastrophic. What I'm about to tell you hasn't been widely reported yet. Most mainstream outlets are focused on the moratorium, the negotiations, the back-and-forth rhetoric between league and union. But behind that noise, something much more dangerous is brewing. The expansion deals, the crown jewels of the WNBA's growth strategy, are wobbling. And if they collapse, this league may never recover. Let me give you some background on why the expansion situation matters so much. When the WNBA announced expansion to Portland and Toronto, it wasn't just about adding 2 teams. It was a statement. A declaration that women's basketball had arrived. That the league was stable enough, successful enough, and valuable enough to attract major investment. The expansion fees were reportedly massive. Some estimates put them at $50 million or more per franchise. Money that was supposed to flow into the league's coffers and strengthen its financial foundation. More importantly, these expansion teams represented validation. Portland and Toronto are serious sports markets. Markets with passionate fan bases and strong corporate sponsorship potential. Getting ownership groups to commit to those cities send a message to the entire sports world. The WNBA is legit. The WNBA is growing. The WNBA is worth your attention. That was the message. Until it wasn't. Let's start with Portland. The ownership group there was genuinely excited when they announced their intentions. Press conferences, community outreach, promises of a first-class organization that would represent the Pacific Northwest with pride. The city was ready. Fans were ready. The infrastructure was in place. And then, the CBA negotiations stalled. At first, the Portland ownership group was understanding. These things take time. Labor disputes happen in professional sports. No need to panic. But as months dragged on, as the rhetoric became more toxic and the positions more entrenched, that understanding started to fade. According to sources close to the situation, Portland's ownership has become increasingly frustrated with the league's inability to resolve its internal conflicts. They didn't sign up for this. They signed up for a growing, thriving league with momentum and excitement. Not a league paralyzed by infighting and threatening to tear itself apart. Here's where things get really concerning. Expansion teams don't just pay a one-time fee and walk away. They have ongoing financial commitments. Staff to hire, facilities to prepare, marketing campaigns to launch. All of that costs money. Money that ownership groups are spending right now, during a moratorium where they can't sign players, can't participate in drafts, and can't do any of the normal business of building a team. They're paying for a product they can't actually access. Imagine buying a car and being told you can't drive it until 2 strangers agree on the color of the steering wheel. That's what it feels like to be an expansion owner right now. Frustrating, expensive, and increasingly untenable. The Toronto situation is slightly different but equally concerning. Canada represents a massive opportunity for women's basketball. The country has produced incredible talent. The sports culture is passionate and growing. A WNBA franchise in Toronto could tap into an entire nation's worth of potential fans. But international expansion comes with unique challenges. Currency considerations, cross-border logistics, different regulatory environments. All of this requires careful planning and significant investment. The Toronto ownership group committed to navigating these challenges because they believed in the league's trajectory. They saw the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. They saw the rising television numbers. They saw a league on the verge of breakthrough success. What they didn't see coming was this: a moratorium with no end date, negotiations going nowhere, and a growing sense that the people running this league, both on the management and labor sides, might not be capable of solving their problems. Now here's where my sources start getting nervous about being identified. What I'm about to share comes from multiple people with direct knowledge of expansion ownership discussions. They spoke on condition of anonymity because the implications are so significant. Are you ready? At least one expansion ownership group has quietly consulted with legal counsel about their options if the league fails to reach a CBA. They want to know, what happens to their expansion fee? They want to know, what are their contractual obligations if the league suspends operations? They want to know, is there an exit ramp? Let me be absolutely clear about what this means. It means that ownership groups who committed tens of millions of dollars to the WNBA's future are now exploring what happens if that future doesn't exist. They're not pulling out yet. They're not making public statements about leaving, but they're asking questions. And when investors start asking those kinds of questions, it's never a good sign. Let me explain something about how wealthy investors think. These are people who didn't become successful by throwing money at failing enterprises. They're strategic, calculated, cold when they need to be. When they invest in something like a sports franchise, they're buying into a vision, a growth trajectory, a return on investment, whether financial or reputational. The moment that vision starts crumbling, the moment the growth trajectory reverses, the moment the investment starts looking like a liability rather than an asset, they start looking for exits. Not because they're bad people, not because they don't care about women's sports, because that's how they protect themselves and their other investments. And right now, the vision they bought into is crumbling before their eyes. If even one expansion team pulls out, the consequences would ripple through the entire league. First, the financial hit. Those expansion fees were baked into the league's financial projections. Losing them would blow a hole in the budget. Second, the credibility damage. If Portland or Toronto walks away, it sends a message to other potential investors. This league is unstable. Don't put your money here. Third, the psychological impact on existing teams. If expansion can't survive the current chaos, how confident can existing owners be about their own investments? It's a domino effect. One falling piece knocking over everything around it. And speaking of existing owners, they're not exactly thrilled with the current situation either. Remember, most WNBA franchises have been operating at a loss for years. Owners have accepted those losses because they believed profitability was coming, because the growth numbers were encouraging, because the future looked bright. Now, the future looks uncertain at best, catastrophic at worst. Some owners are reportedly questioning whether continued investment makes sense. If the league can't get its house in order, if the CBA negotiations drag on indefinitely, why keep pouring money into a sinking ship? I'm not saying owners are about to abandon their teams. Not yet. But the conversations are happening. The doubts are spreading. And the patience that once seemed infinite is running out. Here's another angle that deserves attention. The WNBA's new media rights deal was supposed to be transformational. A massive increase over the previous contract. Proof that broadcasters recognized the league's growing value. But media deals aren't just about current performance. They're about future potential, about trajectory, about confidence in the product. What happens when the networks see this chaos? What happens when ESPN executives watch the moratorium announcement and wonder whether the league will even exist in 3 years? What happens when negotiators for the next media deal factor in the risk that labor disputes could cancel seasons or permanently damage the fan base? I'll tell you what happens. The offers get smaller. The terms get worse. The transformational deal becomes a survival deal. Every day this moratorium continues, the league loses momentum. Every day without free agency signings, fans have less to talk about. Every day without roster moves, media coverage shifts elsewhere. Every day without forward progress, the critics get louder. Told you so, they're saying. The WNBA was never sustainable. It was always propped up by subsidies and good intentions. And now it's collapsing under its own weight. These critics have been wrong about a lot of things. But if this continues, if the moratorium stretches into weeks and months, they might end up being right. Not because women's basketball isn't valuable. Not because the athletes aren't talented. Not because the fans aren't passionate. But because the people running this league, on both sides, couldn't get out of their own way. There's one more piece to this puzzle that we haven't discussed yet. The overseas situation. See, WNBA players have traditionally relied on overseas leagues during the off-season to supplement their income. Russia, Turkey, China, Australia. These leagues pay well, sometimes better than the WNBA itself. But this year, with the moratorium in effect and the WNBA season uncertain, something unprecedented is happening. Players are making decisions they never would have considered before. Some are signing longer overseas contracts. Contracts that might conflict with a potential WNBA season. Some are reconsidering their commitment to American women's basketball altogether. And at least 3 prominent players you would definitely recognize, are reportedly exploring opportunities that would take them out of the WNBA permanently. Not retirement, not injury, not personal reasons. They're leaving because they've lost faith in the league's future. If that happens, if star players start abandoning ship, the damage would be irreversible. 3 players. 3 names that would send shockwaves through the basketball world. 3 stars who have apparently looked at the current situation and decided, enough is enough. I can't name them yet. The information is too sensitive. The source is too vulnerable. But I can tell you this much. If even one of them follows through, if even one marquee player walks away from the WNBA because of this chaos, the league will never be the same. To understand why this matters, you need to understand how WNBA players have traditionally survived financially. The WNBA season runs roughly from May through October. 5, maybe 6 months of basketball. That leaves half the year with no games, no paychecks, no income from American professional basketball. So what do players do? They go overseas. Russia was a major destination for years, until geopolitical events made that impossible. Turkey, China, Australia, and various European leagues have filled the gap. These overseas contracts often pay significantly more than WNBA salaries. Some players have earned more in a single overseas season than in their entire WNBA career. It's been a necessary arrangement, a way for elite athletes to earn a living wage despite the WNBA's financial limitations. But it's also created a vulnerability. Here's what's happening now. With the WNBA moratorium in effect and the league's future uncertain, overseas teams are sensing opportunity. They're approaching WNBA players with offers that weren't on the table before. Not just higher salaries, multi-year commitments, guaranteed money regardless of what happens in America, stability in an increasingly unstable world. And some players are listening. Think about it from their perspective. You've dedicated your life to basketball. You've sacrificed everything for your sport. And now, through no fault of your own, your professional future is being held hostage by a labor dispute. The WNBA can't tell you when the season will start. Can't tell you if there will even be a season. Can't guarantee you a paycheck or a roster spot or anything resembling security. Meanwhile, a team in Turkey or Australia is offering guaranteed money. Right now. No strings attached. What would you do? The 3 players I mentioned aren't role players or bench warmers. These are all-stars. Olympic medalists. Names that casual fans recognize. The kind of players who move the needle, sell tickets, and generate headlines. Losing them wouldn't just hurt the league competitively. It would devastate the product. The WNBA's recent surge in popularity wasn't just about the league itself. It was about specific players, specific stories, specific personalities that captured public imagination. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Aya Wilson, Breanna Stewart. These players aren't interchangeable. They're irreplaceable. And if the league's dysfunction starts driving away its biggest stars, the casual fans who just started paying attention will disappear overnight. But it's not just about the 3 stars I mentioned. There's a broader talent drain happening that's even more concerning. Young players, the ones who should be the future of the league, are watching this situation very carefully. They're seeing the chaos, the uncertainty, the inability of adults to solve basic problems. And they're starting to wonder whether the WNBA is worth their commitment. Some college stars are reportedly exploring overseas options straight out of school. Why enter a WNBA draft if the league might not exist in 2 years? Some international players who might have come to America are reconsidering. Why leave stable European leagues for an unstable American one? The pipeline of talent that the WNBA depends on for its future is being contaminated by the chaos of the present. We should have learned this lesson already. Brittany Griner's detention in Russia was a tragedy that exposed uncomfortable truths about how WNBA players have to live. The reason she was in Russia in the first place was economic. The WNBA didn't pay enough. Players had to go overseas to survive. After her release, there was talk about fixing this. About paying players enough that they wouldn't have to put themselves in vulnerable situations abroad. For a moment, it seemed like the league understood. For a moment, it seemed like change was coming. And now the league is frozen. The negotiations are stalled. And players are once again being forced to look overseas for financial security. We learned nothing. Absolutely nothing. Here's what really keeps me awake at night. The current crop of WNBA players is the most talented in league history. The skill level, the athleticism, the basketball IQ, it's unprecedented. This should be the golden generation. 20 years from now, we should be telling stories about this era. About the players who transformed women's basketball. About the rivalries that captivated millions. About the championships that cemented legacies. Instead, we might be telling stories about the generation that got squandered. The era that collapsed under the weight of its own dysfunction. The players who never got to fulfill their potential because the league they loved couldn't survive. That would be the real tragedy. Not the financial losses. Not the business failures. Not the empty arenas. The wasted potential of extraordinary athletes who deserved better than this. I want to take a moment here to acknowledge something important. These aren't just assets or commodities we're talking about. They're human beings. Women who have dedicated their entire lives to basketball. Who sacrificed social lives, financial security, and conventional career paths to pursue their dreams. They didn't ask for this chaos. They didn't create this dysfunction. They just want to play the game they love and get paid fairly for their incredible talents. And right now, forces beyond their control are threatening to destroy everything they've worked for. That's not abstract. That's personal. That's devastating. Here's something else that's not being widely reported. Not everyone in the union agrees with the current strategy. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but it deserves deeper exploration. There are factions within the WNBA. Players who think the revenue-sharing demand has gone too far. Players who would rather take an imperfect deal than risk losing everything. These players are being silenced. Not literally, not through formal censorship or punishment, but through social pressure, through fear of being labeled as traitors, through concern about their standing within the player community. When you speak against the union position, you're not just disagreeing with a negotiating strategy. You're betraying your sisters. You're siding with the owners. You're becoming the enemy. That kind of pressure keeps people quiet, even when they know something is deeply wrong. The cracks are starting to show. Conversations that used to happen only in private are starting to leak. Players are whispering to agents, "How long can this go on?" Agents are whispering to each other, "My client is starting to panic." Team personnel are whispering to ownership, "We're losing them. We're actually losing them." The united front that the union has tried to maintain is fracturing. Not publicly. Not yet. But behind closed doors, the unity is crumbling. And when unity crumbles in a labor dispute, things can go one of two ways. Either it leads to compromise, players pressuring their leadership to make a deal, or it leads to chaos, players making individual decisions that undermine collective action. Right now, we're heading toward chaos. Here's what individual chaos looks like in practice. Player A decides she can't wait anymore. She signs a long-term overseas contract, commits to 2 years in Turkey. Player B sees Player A's decision and panics. She doesn't want to be left behind. She starts exploring her own overseas options. Player C, one of the stars I mentioned earlier, decides the whole situation is too unstable. She announces she's taking a break from the WNBA indefinitely. Suddenly, the collective bargaining isn't so collective anymore. Players are making individual survival decisions that weaken the union's position. And the league? The owners? They're watching this happen and recalculating their strategies. Why negotiate with a weakening union? Why make concessions to players who are abandoning ship? The leverage that the players thought they had is evaporating. This brings us to a question that nobody wants to ask out loud. What if the union strategy was doomed from the start? What if the people advising these players, the strategists, the lawyers, the ideologues, fundamentally misread the situation? What if they convinced hundreds of talented women to fight a battle that was never winnable? I've been digging into the background of the key figures shaping the union's approach, and what I've found is troubling. There's a pattern here. A history of aggressive tactics that worked in other contexts but may be completely wrong for this situation. There's an ideology at play that prioritizes symbolism over outcomes. And there's at least one individual whose personal interests may not align with the player's best interests at all. Who is this person? What is their real agenda? And why has nobody in the mainstream media bothered to investigate them? Those answers are coming.